Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The US will be holding a second edition of its Summit for Democracy this week. What's the purpose of the summit? Is democracy simply an end in itself or a means to something more substantial? Why is the US promotion of democracy viewed with suspicion? And while it regularly examines the human rights record of every country around the world, why doesn't the US examine itself and its own human rights record, both domestically and internationally? To discuss these issues and more, I talked to Dr. Fred Membe, President of the Socialist Party of Zambia. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for speaking with us, Doctor. Let's start with democracy, or your understanding of democracy. Is it the end or is it the means to something concrete?
It can never be an end. It's a means to something much more important to a human being. It's much more a means to the happiness of a human being, to the welfare of a human being, to all those things that constitute a dignified life of a human being. Access to food, access to housing, access to clean water, access to health services, access to education, national sovereignty in the country which that individual lives, national honor. All those things constitute democracy. And also, in some way, they matter to human rights.
It sounds like governance, good governance that delivers, and then people do have the access, or people enjoy stability, prosperity, and opportunity to develop themselves. So probably, maybe there are different forms of democracy, but a good governance, it does deliver, or poor governance probably fails to deliver.
What is good governance? Good governance is the ability of people to participate in the governance of their communities, in the governance of their societies, in the governance of their nations, and indeed in the governance of the world in which they live, to ensure that their interests are taken care of, to ensure that their dignity is always under consideration. That's what matters. Those are things that really, really matter to a human being.
Can we say, if there's a good governance, obviously there's participation by the people, or reflection of the will of the people, and then it delivers. That's why we call it a good governance. If we judge countries by that standard, there are countries we can say who are well governed, like Singapore. Or if you look at the track record of China over the past 40 plus years, the strong economic growth and improvement in people's living standard, it shows Chinese system, whatever you call it, it delivers.
The Chinese system does deliver. The Chinese system does respect human dignity. To govern and lead a people of 1.4 billion human beings is not an easy thing. And especially a country that started off very poor, as one of the 11th poorest countries. It's not easy to bring it to where it is today. If you have no respect for human beings, the human beings would not also tolerate that. You can't oppress 1.4 billion human beings and they just keep quiet. And they just tolerate. And they watch you. Even if you are so powerful, you are so hardworking, how can you take care of 1.4 billion human beings without their participation? So it shows you how strong the governance system, how appropriate the governance system that has been employed in China. And also, good governance is not only about caring about the human beings in your territory. It's also caring about the human beings outside your territory. How do you treat other people? How do you relate to other countries, other nations? What is your attitude towards others? What you do inside your house matters also in terms of what you do outside your house. If you don't, you clean your house every time, but the environment you are destroying, are you a good person? For how long are you going to live in that house secure? Mm-hmm. China has demonstrated the ability to live well within its territories and to live well outside this territory, to respect people within this territory and to respect people outside this territory. You cannot claim to be democratic. You cannot claim to care about human rights when you enslave others, when you brutalize others, when every day you're insulting, mocking others. You have no respect for others other than yourself. You exploit others, you plunder other nations. You dictate to others what they should do in their homes. You can't be a good person, even inside your own house. So China has demonstrated not only being good to its own citizens, but also to the global citizens. China has cared more about our global environment than any other country. Despite heavy industrialization, China has cared more about the environment than any other country. It has done more to protect the environment than any other country. This is the country that has developed without having colonies, without enslaving anybody, without plundering anybody. This is a country that has developed with mutual respect for others, win-win cooperation with others. What more can you ask of a people that is pushing so hard?
But then if you look at for example, the coverage of China in the Western press or in remarks by Western officials, in particular US officials, they often refer to China as the biggest, or top challenge or biggest threat to the US existence. How do you understand that kind of allegation or criticism?
You can understand why they are worried about like a country like China, because China is working in the opposite direction to them. China is working to free other people and free itself from being plundered, from being humiliated. This is the country that has, the USA is a country that has thrived, survived, prospered from slave trade, cross-Atlantic slave trade. They enslaved the Africans for centuries. They plundered the resources of Latin America, the resources of Africa, the resources of Asia. They plundered even the resources of Europe. This is the country, if plunder today, exploitation of other people is removed, the USA will not be the powerful country that it is today. If there's equality in the dealings with each other, the USA ceases because it doesn't know how to deal with other people on an equal basis, with other nations on an equal basis. It gets lost. It's worried today with the multipolar world that is emerging because its hegemonic interests are being threatened. It's not China per se, it's the interests of the Americans that are being threatened with a world that is more equal, that is more fair, that is more just. They can't survive in that world because their methods of existence are based on plundering other nations, on humiliating other nations, on exploiting other nations.
Well, a related question, I would cite is, the Chinese efforts to broker, basically a peace deal for Saudi Arabia and Iran to resume their diplomatic ties. And then you see the Chinese efforts to create some conditions for peace or for ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine in this Ukraine crisis. But then if you look at the reaction or response from the US side, they try to dismiss the Chinese efforts or belittle the Chinese efforts as something else. Why is that kind of response? The Chinese efforts basically have been welcomed by the rest of the world. People see that as very positive, more peace, more stability in the Middle East, more reconciliation. What's wrong with that?
A world that is peaceful is not suitable for the United States because it prospers from conflict. It sets one humble nation against the other. it does not help to remove conflicts. It always creates conflicts. When you look at the conflicts that have existed in the world since 1776, when the USA was formed, the USA usually has a hand in it. When it doesn't have a hand in it, it doesn't work to resolve those conflicts. It works to perpetuate those conflicts because it thrives from conflict. It benefits from conflicts. When the world is divided, it becomes easier to exploit. It becomes easier to plunder. A united people cannot be plundered. A united people cannot be exploited. A united people cannot be made to fight each other and prosper. This is the country that benefits from wars. It prospers from wars. It creates wars as a business to make profits from. It makes profits from wars.
Well, the famous example is the military-industrial complex in the U.S. They certainly welcome conflicts and wars so they can, sell weapons, ammunitions, and make a profit out of that.
Yes, and they are also linked to the media. They are linked to the politics. They are the sponsors of the politicians. So they have to find conflict all the time. If no conflict arises naturally, they create it so that their industries make more and more money.
And every year the U.S. publish, human rights record on every country but itself. What do you make of that? Some people accuse the U.S. of using the so-called human rights to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, in particular the countries they are not happy with or they see as rivals. What do you make of that?
The pious arm of human rights that the USA waves all the time is hypocritical. This is the country that has invaded other countries, killing so many people, including children. This is the country that has appropriated the resources of other countries, leaving those countries helpless. Look at Iraq today.
20th anniversary of...
20th anniversary. What is happening to the Iraqi oil money? When Iraq sells oil, all the money goes to the USA. It's the USA government that decides how much to give it to the Iraqi government to use. The Iraqi government has to submit a budget to the USA to get its own money after 20 years of that conflict.